So today's session is more focused around the business investor individuals, and we are going to cover quite a bit under the umbrella of business investors and some similar programs that falls under the business investor categories and surrounding that area. So we will be covering that in much more greater detail. This is an exciting webinar for those individuals who have this entrepreneurial spirit to grow faster, bigger, better, who already have a lot of business experiences, as well as who wants to start new businesses in Canada, who have a lot of fundings that they want to continue with their expansion of the fundings in Canada through the Business Investors Program, or who are looking for the business opportunities to try out something new for as a startup initiative in Canada by taking the support from the Canadian designated organizations and institutions so that they can actually grow better and from the Canadian soil. So the whole point of today's webinar is to provide the information to individuals in a different capacities in the business and entrepreneurial series of the programs that are available for the community. So we'll start off with the Business Investors Program. We'll head towards the Owner-Operator, LMIA. One of the programs, this is that program that many of the individuals perhaps have no or little understanding about it. So we're going to cover that in much more greater detail today. We'll go through the startup visas and intra-company transferee program, and then we'll end off our session with Q&As, for the entire group to opportunity for them to raise their questions, and I would be happy to answer those questions. We'll start off with the land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that the land I'm living and working on, I'm presenting this from my home in Toronto, which is a traditional territory of the peoples of Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and Haudenosaunee. I'm grateful and blessed to be able to live and work in such a beautiful land. So let's jump onto the Business Investors Program. Now, let's try to understand that what is the Business Investors Program. The lingo, the language is going to play a very critical role in people's understanding about it. So business investors, first of all, it's a provincial nominee program. It's not a federal program. And if you recall the first webinar that I conducted for the community, in which I clarified that the difference between the provincial nominee program versus the federal program is managed and executed by the federal government, whereas the provincial nominee program is managed by the provinces, but ultimate execution is through the federal authority, right? And when we talk a little bit more detail about what it has the implication on the individual is that if the business investors is only the provincial nominee program, it's only available to the provinces, it means if there are 10 provinces across Canada, then there are 10 possible business investors programs are out there, which also means that each provincial program will have their own specific conditions. So it's very important that we do not take a blanket approach when we talk about the Business Investors Program. That's number one. When we talk about the provincial nominee, we have to be very specifically talking about that specific province of choice, what we are talking, right? That's first. The second is once we have picked up one or two provinces for that purpose, then we have to dig down into specific conditions in the eligibility criteria and other factors through which you will be able to assess that whether candidate has the stronger potential of being an investor under that category of their program or not. So those are the two main considerations one has to make before putting their time and efforts into investments and any other further endeavors that they want to do. So this stream is technically for entrepreneurs, business owners, and senior management individuals. So we will go through this piece of the experience required under this program shortly, but just wanted to give you an idea that this stream is only for those individuals who are already business owners. Now, there are two kinds of business owners here we can talk about. That the business owners who have, let's say, a revenue of $1 million or more, or I'm just putting out the numbers so that community can understand that if it's a small business, would that be considered under business investor? Yes, it can be, as long as if you meet the requirements. If you don't meet the requirements, then we have another program in today's presentation, in which we are going to cover that if you do not meet that high monetary investment requirement, then what are the alternative options for you for investing in the Canadian soil and getting yourself to immigrate to Canada. So we will come to that as well. But just for the understanding perspective, business owners and the management, senior management individuals are eligible under the Business Investors Program from outside Canada. And it is also important to understand, I keep, come across with these questions from business investors from different parts of the world, that Minhas, do we need to have 100% ownership, or can it be in partnership? And if there is a partnership, what will be the shareholding? So that's the minimum requirement, that if you can have 100% shareholding for the business that you are interested to invest in Canada, of course. But let's say if you are interested in partnering with an existing Canadian business owner in Canada, then you have to have, under business investor category, you have to have minimum 33.33% of shareholding in that company, right? That's important. For the clarity and the linguistic perspective, going back to the first webinar, I was paying more attention to the community's attention towards the language that we play and we use in the Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada's arm. So under that umbrella, the program names vary from province to province, but generally at large, they call under business investors. But specifically when you pick up and when you find out more information, I've given some information over here for 5 provinces, and you can find out the differences between the name of the programs are slightly different, but the purpose, overarching purpose of this business investor program remains the same. So for Ontario, it's business, it's entrepreneur stream. For British Columbia, it is known as entrepreneur immigration. For Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, it's known as entrepreneur programs only. And for Quebec, it's known as investor program. So now let's take a deep dive into the business investor program. And I know that this slide is something that we already discussed in the first webinar, but in this webinar, I wanted to go into much more specific details of the program and then what it means by specific eligibility criteria. So that's what we are going to try to nail it down today. So for the sake of example, I have picked up 3 programs, and if you can see the first program, Ontario within GTA. So Ontario offers 2 business investors program, right? Under entrepreneur stream of Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program, there are 2 programs out there. Rest of other Canadian provinces, they have only 1 program for entire province, but Ontario has 2 programs available, and that's regionally based. So if your intent of establishing the business is within Greater Toronto Area region, I repeat, within Greater Toronto Area region, then of course there are requirements are the ones that you are seeing on the first column, right? This one. If you are looking towards the businesses that is you're establishing outside Ontario, outside Greater Toronto Area, then you have a second column to look into in terms of the eligibility requirements. The third example that I've used is Nova Scotia province, right? And many people, ask me that why from Ontario, 2 programs from Ontario and then Nova Scotia. And there is a reason for it. I wanted to use this as a base example. So let me open it, and then perhaps I will try to use some examples over here. If you see the investment amount required in Nova Scotia is 150,000 Canadian dollars. Now, this is the investment amount that you pledge, you commit in your documentation when you submit your expression of interest to the specific province. In this case, Nova Scotia, for example. If you put out the application, this is the minimum amount that is required for the investment in Nova Scotia for your business investors program application. Now, $150,000 is the least amount across all Canadian provinces. So this is why I used Nova Scotia as one of the other example in the explanation of the Business Investors Program. Whereas the most popular, for sure, because of the opportunities in terms of the businesses, the number of activities that goes on in Ontario, and Ontario being the hub of business activities across Canada, many people are interested in the program, which is the business opportunity that is available outside Greater Toronto area. And just mind it, outside Greater Toronto area does not necessarily mean that you're going to be in the rural communities. By all means, you can have your business establishment in the rural community for sure. But at the same time, outside GTA does not constitute that you're going to be too far from Toronto. Let's say it's from the main downtown Toronto, the drive time is going to be as long as 1 hour, 1 hour, 15, 30 minutes at the most, something along those lines, right? So you can understand that many people choose to establish their business outside GTA area in that regional location, and where the investment amount required is only $200,000. There are business investors who are more focused on the economic outcome of their business investment from the perspective of ROI. They look at this opportunity. For example, if they have some businesses that they find that will be more suited in the hub or the core of downtown Toronto, then and they have the capacity to invest the amount, then they go for this option of Ontario within Greater Toronto area. So they commit, they pledge that they are going to invest a minimum of $600,000 if their businesses have to be inside Greater Toronto area. So that's number one criteria that you need to understand. The second most important thing is not only this investment amount, but at the same time, what is the net worth? Now, net worth, I've come across, we deal with a lot of business investors, applicants, and from different parts of the world where the political situation and the safety and security situations may not be ideal. In those circumstances, they might not be able to present the documentary evidence that they have the net worth of $800,000 or $1 million or more so or less. In those cases, some applicants ask me that what would happen if we are unable to showcase that documentary evidence in our bank or in our businesses directly? Well, the third-party verification process by the approved designated institutions is mandated to cover and to inquire all the areas of assets and the net worth, and it becomes part of the net worth of that individual, whether it is directly available in the form of the bank, cash, or the farmland, or the multiple investments across different countries. That's where the third-party verification comes into handy, and that is done by the government designated institutions. For example, KPMG is one of those institutions that takes over the third-party net worth verification process. MNP is another consulting firm in Canada. They also take over the assessment of net worth verification from any part of the world. It's in their mandate. So applicants do not need to think or worry if the situation, if the security or the political situation is not in their best favorable situation, that they are unable to disclose that information out there publicly. In those cases as well, individuals will have the opportunity that they can actually provide some indirect information that can account to be part of the net worth verification document that will be conducted by those designated organizations. So that's important piece. So for net worth within Greater Toronto area, business opportunity requires $800,000 minimum, whereas here it is half. So that's why I keep emphasizing many individuals who come across with an open mindset, and if their business idea is is feasible to have it established outside Greater Toronto area, then my preference to those business individuals is that you should look into this program. Or alternatively, if this is, for example, is becoming a concern for some individuals that $200,000 is not something that you're interested in, then perhaps Nova Scotia option of spending $150,000 is something one can look into. But again, the flip side of it is your net worth verification should be 200,000 more than what is required in Ontario outside GTA program. So it is again looking into the balance of probabilities, that what is the best option for the candidate, and based on it that they can move forward. In terms of the business experience, this is also mandatory requirement. Now, in the previous slide, I mentioned that it can be senior management individuals. And on the next one, I'm saying that it has to be a business experience. I wanted to clarify that it has to be an experience. Now, experience from what perspective? Let's say there was an individual from one of the Southeast Asian country reached out to me about that he's an accountant in one of the international firm, but just an accountant, never had the management experience, but he had the funds available to either of these programs. He was open and up for it. That means I want to move forward with one of the business investors category. But in my opinion, I said that this is not a strong case to put out there, because in terms of the experience requirement, you need to either have a business experience, you should be one of the owners of the business, or you have had senior management experience. So any individuals working in any company who has the senior management experience, that's number one, and who has any of these requirements met. For example, if they have, let's talk about, for the sake of example over here, Ontario outside GTA program. So if they are ready to invest in $200,000 in a business venture that they are interested in, they have the net worth of 400,000 Canadian dollar that can be verified. And if they have 2 years of experience in the last 5 years, that's important, in the last 5 years, not in any given 5 years, but in the last 5 years prior to submission of the expression of interest. That needs to be, they are eligible for proceeding with their business investors application, right? Shareholding equity minimum requirement is these numbers are minimum numbers. So minimum you have to have 33.33%. I come across with candidates who have, who have partners, who have friends who are business owners in Canada, and they want to partner with their friends, and they say that we wanted to invest in our business in the business of our friends, and on a partnership basis. One of the mandatory requirement for all these programs is that you have to have a minimum 33.33% of shareholding there. Now, IELTS, English language. It's interesting that whatever we in the previous webinars we've talked about becomes less important under this business investor category. If you recall, I was insisting in my first webinar that business investors programs criteria for the selection and eligibility are very different than a typical regular professional immigration program. And professional means professional skill immigration programs, right? The whole point of business investor program is not to be, not to necessarily have an excellent or high performance level of English language or French language is required. It does not require you to have the master's level of education. In fact, we have clients who have not been able to complete their high school, but they are well-established business owners back in their country of residence, and they want to immigrate to Canada. So for them, what is important are the first few factors and eligibility criteria that is important for them. The rest is the optional. So IELTS, if you will give the IELTS, and if you get the base of minimum CLB 5, it's good. If you don't, that's also good. That's also acceptable. under Ontario program. If you go for Nova Scotia, the minimum requirement is CLB5. So should a candidate decide to move towards Nova Scotia, CLB5 is required. That's mandatory. High school is required in Nova Scotia. So again, it is important that one needs to look into the specific program eligibility criteria. Although it's a business investor category, but one needs to look into it much more greater detail so that you can identify which program is going to be the most appropriate and will enable you to be picked up through the point system in their upcoming draws for the business investors program. Now, you can see I use the word of point system. So all of these programs are also points-based. So there is a competition there because there are investors from all over the world who are putting their expression of interest to become a Canadian under business investors program. So definitely the higher the points you will have, the higher the chances you will be picked up sooner and get to your business idea implementing in Canada. Age points, very, very, very common in the professional skills immigration programs. People are disadvantaged or they get less points the moment they cross 35 plus. There are no points for the age in any of the business investors program. And remember, the criteria for the business investor is you have a business, you have the funds available, you have the required experience or business ownership previous experience in that capacity. And if you meet the other requirements like 2 years out of 5 years or 3 years out of 10 years requirement, then age is not a question. It's not a criteria or factor of eligibility under any of these programs. Third important thing, many individuals, and there are some investors I have come across with who have a stellar history of businesses across the world, and they have the tendency that they want to use this program for getting the immigration or the Canadian passport, if you will. Then in that capacity, they think that they're going to invest even $600,000 or even $1 million. That's not a question for them or a problem for them, but they want to have the ability to remain mobile, and they do not want themselves to be restricted around staying in Canada, managing that business going forward once their application is approved. Well, that's incorrect assessment or incorrect opinion about it, that it's okay that you're going to be here establishing your business in Canada, but you're not required to continue to manage day-to-day activities in Canada. This is extremely important. One needs to understand that day-to-day management is one of the criteria for the business investors programs across the board. Minimum job creation, your business plan, proposal, all of those things that the financial trajectory should also allude to at least minimum of creation of these job opportunities for the Canadians. So you're not coming to Canada only to establish yourself and get the immigration, but one of the other purposes is that you're coming here to establish yourself and support Canadian economy down the road by creating new job opportunities for the Canadian PR and citizenships. Some of the key points to remember under Business Investors Program, as I mentioned to you, previous experience as owner or senior management experience. The purpose, again, it is that I come across with many applicants, the situation that they were having a business in industry A and they want to come to Canada and invest in a business in an industry that is very different from industry A, and let's say this is industry B. In those circumstances, of course, you are allowed to do so, but you should be able to demonstrate the transferable skills that you've had from industry A, and how it's going to help establish the business in Canada for industry B sector. Must be ready to genuinely participate actively in the business. Cannot emphasize more on that. Age has only optional points. So there is no disadvantage for the age at all in any of these programs. So an individual, we deal with 55 plus years of age and can come to Canada under Business Investors Program. Yes, absolutely. If he or she meets all those requirements, definitely. The expression of interest requires a detailed assessment of market research, feasibility reports, financial and business plan. This is the most crucial piece. Many individuals tend to miss out, and they think that they have an idea. They meet with some of the stakeholders here and there, and they think that expression of interest is going to be approved for with those meetings only, or with that intent only. That's not enough. Most likely their expression of interest are not going to be picked up until a thorough market research has been conducted, detailed feasibility report, SWOT analysis, the entire business proposal idea is established with evidence from the Canadian perspective, that how that business is going to create new opportunities and advance the economic agenda of Canada through that business opportunity. So it's extremely important that when expression of interest, and this is the stage when you do it before you apply for expression of interest, because all of these things are going to be critical for the expression of interest. So when you submit the EOI or expression of interest, you need to take the nuggets from the market research, from the feasibility reports, from your analysis of the industry, from your financial projections, from your business proposals and the plans, all of those things, and your staffing plans, everything should be out there in your expression of interest. That's why this exercise is extremely important under the business investor programs. Think about, before reading on what you have available on the screen, think about the situation that we're talking about the small to medium-sized businesses. Think about a situation in which the individual may have the net worth of $1 million. That's completely fine, but he or she chooses that I want to first not commit myself to $150,000 for Nova Scotia, or $200,000 or $600,000, either case for Ontario. He or she does not want to start off with that mega investment. What do we do in that case? The individual has the business experience. He owns the small to medium-sized business, or even the large business, but he or she does not want to commit to that much of a big investment right away. In those cases, owner-operator LMIA will come into handy. So it's the middle way in which you are not required to commit to a specific dollar amount, if you will, from the perspective of what we compared in the Business Investors Program. And what it is there for, the owner-operator LMIA is also in somewhat comes under the business investor criteria, business investor category, right? And how is that so? We are going to go into much more detail. So as you can see, it is solely, purely based to create the significant impact on the Canadian economy, and also to bring more social and intracultural fabric to strengthen its mosaic of multiculturalism in Canada. So all of those things play a very pivotal role in that, right? And any individual, any entrepreneur who is listening to this webinar can think of his or her own idea to be executed. Can that be possible? Under owner-operator LMIA, yes, it is possible. Of course, there are programmatic requirements and eligibility factors are there, and we will go through with that. But this opens up a big opportunity for anyone who does not want to move forward with the business investors committed amount that may be higher for some individuals and would decide to move into a medium to low investment area in which they want to try a business opportunity in Canada. So that's what the program is for. Also, it's interesting to understand that this is a work permit that leads towards the permanent residency. So such programs are known as dual intent. The dual intent means, if you think from the perspective of temporary visas, and we've discussed that in the first webinar, that there are two major types of visas that that Canadian government is divided into in terms of the visas. Number one is a temporary visas. Now, temporary visas include what? Visitor visas, parents super visas, student visas, and the work permit as well. So these are all come under the category of temporary resident visas. What are the permanent visas? Of course, permanent visas are the PR visas, the permanent residency, right? So the express entry programs that you go through with Federal Skilled Worker Program or any of the program that directly is a permanent residency program. Business investor is the permanent residency program, whereas the owner-operator LMIA belongs to this criteria, not the permanent residency, but owner-operator LMIA is considered as a program that offers dual intent, meaning you start off with the temporary work permit under the temporary resident visa, but your intention is, if you get successful, then you will move towards the permanent residency for yourself and your family or your business partners. That's the whole intent of the owner-operator LMIA. So this is one of those programs which are very less known to the public in general because they fall under the international mobility programs. You will not find out much of the open source information available out there about the owner-operator LMIA. So we are going to cover a little bit over here that what it is all about and how do we move forward in that owner-operator LMIA. So first and foremost important thing is that you must own the 50% of the stakes in the proposed business. That's important, right? There is no cap on the investment money. So that's an interesting and very, very encouraging piece of information. If you recall in the previous slides, we just looked into business investors for outside GTA, the minimum cap or minimum investment required was 200,000 Canadian dollars. Whereas in this business, there is no minimum or maximum required, but 50% of the equity in the business, in the proposed business, should be owned by the individual. Evidence of any measures taken to initiate the business plans, for example, the business numbers from the Canadian respective government institutions. You have to have a business plan, you have to have a business number, you have to have an articles of incorporation. Your name, the candidate applicant's name, should be part of the formal articles of incorporation. Evidence of the financial ability to commence business in Canada and compensate employees. So it's critically important. Although we just mentioned that from the financial perspective, the amount investment amount is not specific amount is required. However, you need to be able to demonstrate that you are going to be able to compensate your staff and your employees. You are going to be able to financially sustain yourself in Canada. So all those things are important, but there is no specific minimum dollar value, dollar amount is there because it varies from a small business to a medium business to a very large business. So it depends. So that's why there is no specific guidelines available on the minimum amount required to financially showcase yourself that you are established and you'll be able to compensate your employees. Depends on the industry sector, region, area, many other factors come into the play to determine which one is going to be the best option for the candidate. Must be able to demonstrate transferable skills, of course, from the previous experience to the new venture in Canada. So Now, the accountant that we were taking as an example before, who's interested in the business investor and was not eligible because he or she did not have the experience, required experience for the business investor was you have to have either business ownership experience or minimum, you should have senior management experience. Here, there is not requirement for that specific purpose. However, whatever your experience has been, must be able to demonstrate that you can carry out that activity in Canada should you come to Canada and start working on your business idea. The application requires detailed assessment of market research, feasibility, financial. Now, this goes exactly in alignment with the business investor. So that's why I was saying that some components of the business investor program resonate with owner-operator LMIA, but owner-operator LMIA has a lot of flexibility available in terms of the dollar values and the investment amount, and the net worth verification is not as the same as in the business investors. So this area of program allows individual to be more creative, more flexibility, but at the same time, you have to provide all your homework in order to get your application through the LMIA and the work permit process. In a simple way, LMIA is a labor market impact assessment. It is, for the layman's purpose, it is a permission granted by the government of Canada to the specific business, the Canadian business, that yes, you can hire someone from outside Canada. That's LMIA in a simplest form. The owner-operator LMIA, remember the holistic purpose of owner-operator LMIA is the individual is sitting outside Canada, has acquired some 50% shareholding of that company, a company that is worth of $100,000, let's say, for the sake of an example. He or she has invested $50,000 in the Canadian company, and the relevant articles of incorporation and documentation evidence is now secured by the Canadian company. And then the whole point is the applicant is going to apply for his own, who's the owner right now, his own work permit and labor market, so that he can come to Canada and start working with this company, because he has the ownership in that company for which he has invested more than 50% of the equity in that business. So it is a clear connection that it is a self-proclaimed work permit application that's being processed, that's being put forward to IRCC, and that's how it is processed by the IRCC. That owner himself is going to say that I want to work to come to Canada to proceed with my business idea that I have recently acquired. And here is the evidence, and here is the homework and the background that I have done in order to be successful in Canada. So that's how there are some similarities between business investors, some differences, between these two, business investors and owner-operator LMIA work permit. So first distinction between LMIA and startup visa. LMIA was a work permit route. Startup visa is the permanent residency route. It's part of this side of the bucket. We've been talking about the permanent resident visas. So startup visa is a federal program. First, it's not a provincial program. Second, it is the permanent residency program. It's not the temporary resident visas, just like LMIA is. Startup visas is purely made with an intent to invite entrepreneurs who have ambitious goals to start off with any business ideas, to bring people on board of like-minded individuals, to find the resources from the Canadian resources that is available out there, and to build businesses from their own. And that is the whole idea, is that something new, something innovative business idea. So for example, if you're talking about buying a coffee shop, might not be the appropriate program for startup visas. But let's say a coffee shop that offers coffees in a very innovative way, perhaps, and I'm just throwing an idea that instead of people going to the coffee shops, the coffees are being delivered through the apps or through any innovative idea. That is something can be considered under startup visa programs. So that's the main distinction between that. If you are following through the traditional business ideas, then for you, the best program would be either the business investors or owner operator LMIA program, right? But if you are coming up with creating, for example, again, I'm thinking about some innovative, startups that have taken place all over the world. TripAdvisor, the first website, one of the first few websites that help people to find out the destinations and the flights booking, accommodation through that website in one of the region, and it's spread all over the world. It is the idea that was never existing before. So if you have similar kind of ideas that you want to explore and you want to create, even in the product manufacturing, for example, an ice cream producer, and I know, one of the ice cream producer in Toronto, part of our community, she came up with the idea of creating ice creams that are completely organic and there is no sugar in that. So that is completely a very different way of getting into an industry that's been existing for a number of years, but not in this specific way. So such kind of very creative ideas that you want to bring it up, but at the same time, you need support from the local Canadian designated organization under Startup Visa program. So what are those? Let's get into that right away. Qualifying business. So again, it has to be the business that has to be qualified business. Not all kinds of businesses will be approved for startup visa programs, right? That's first. The second, how many partners can be part of that business? Up to 5. So individuals from UAE or different countries, if they partner together and they find that Canada is the land that they wanted to start off their initiative for that business, all 5 individuals from different countries with different nationalities will be eligible to apply together under that program. So that's important. It is very critical and it is very encouraging, because if you have like-minded people living in different parts of the world, and if all of you thinking, all those 5 individuals are thinking that let's initiate the business in Canada because of the potential growth opportunity, of course 5 individuals can partner together under this program. When 5 individuals are there, of course each partner must have a minimum of 10% of stakeholders or shareholding in that business. That's required. Letter of support, yes, from the designated organization, and we will go through with the designated organization very shortly. Experience, no experience is required. Again, going back to the main question, that it is the first time initiative that these individuals are taking. So they might not have the experience at all. They might be just the fresh graduates from any part of the world and who wants to embark upon the journey of starting their own business with a very creative and innovative idea, and they want to seek that the opportunity to be established and to be grown from Canada. Of course, there is no experience required. Language, of course, it is required. CLB5 proof of funds must be there, because you need to be able to establish that you have the capability and the capacity to finance yourself, to finance your idea. Not the idea. For idea, designated organizations, letter of support is required from that purpose. Let's move into the next slide and see that what are those designated organizations, right? As it says, the business idea has to be vetted through one of these 3 types of designated organizations: venture capital funds, angel investor groups, and business incubators. And these are not any or general, individuals that you will find out that, okay, there is an angel investor group whom I can reach out to, and then if they will approve, I will be eligible under startup visa federal program if these angel investor groups are designated, are one of the designated organizations by the IRCC. Then yes, that's completely eligible and applicable, that their letter of support and their agreement to a minimum of $75,000 of investment in your business idea, if they are ready to support that, then of course your startup visa will be approved, provided you have met all the other conditions that we talked about in the previous slide. For the venture capital funds, you must get at least one of these groups to agree to invest minimum of $200,000. So people who have seen the some programs that come out as Shark Tanks, in which the new individuals, the new innovative ideas are proposed in front of the investors, right? And that is for the media purpose, but that goes way more than what we see on those Shark Tanks videos only, right? So this happens a lot more, a lot at a larger scale. A lot of designated organizations, part of the angel investor groups, venture capital funds, they are there. Or let's say if you are ineligible for venture capital funds or angel investor groups, you think so that your idea will not be supported by the minimum investment and the letter of support from these first two groups, one of these first two groups, then business incubator, it must be accepting your, your idea into one of their programs, in which there is no minimum investment requirement or minimum of commitment is required from the business incubators. As long as business incubator has accepted you and your application to be part of their program, then you meet the requirement of the startup visa federal program. Just for the clarity, designated organizations are business groups that are approved to invest in or support possible startups through the startup visa program. So what is intra-company transfer? Let's say in a simplest form, you're working in KPMG UAE and you are now being transferred to KPMG Canada. KPMG Canada wants to invite you to temporarily join them to meet their specific targets, and either training their employees or initiating a business initiative, a project that was successful in the UAE region under your professional expertise. And now KPMG Canada wants the similar expertise in Canada. That's an intra-company transfer. This is an example, a typical example. That's how at the MNC level, individuals are being transferred across different parts of the world to the Canadian branch or Canadian affiliates or Canadian businesses in Canada under intra-company transfer. But remember, this is important to understand, right? And that's why I would say that it is important for individuals to keep thinking about that this is not a PR program. This is not a dual intent program either. But because you work in Canada, your work experience points under Federal Skilled Worker Program or any other program gets amplified, and then you come under the category of Canadian Experience Class. Although the original intent is not to file the permanent residency, but because after having 1 to 2 years of experience in Canada working with the Canadian businesses, you will be able to claim those points in order to maximize your chances for permanent residency. And more likely, you will lead to that increment of points will lead to the Canadian permanent residency invitation. So that's how it is indirectly linked to that, but not directly. For all intra-company transferees, the Canadian companies have to actually justify that why this individual is being transferred to the Canadian affiliate, Canadian branch. What is the reason? And one of the sole reasons, the core idea is that it's going to improve the management efficiencies in the Canadian branch of that business. So, or it's going to advance the Canadian interests, advance the Canadian exports, right? So those kind of things, which is going to be directly impacting economically to the Canadian government and to the Canadian economic system at large, of course, intra-company transfer is going to play a pivotal role in that way. This is also part of the International Mobility Program. Now, let's move into the intra-company transferee. What are the key requirements? So, of course, the candidate should be currently employed by the KPMG. I will use the same example of KPMG. So KPMG UAE. It is not possible that if an individual is working with McDonald's UAE and wants to get the intra-company transferee to KPMG Canada, from McDonald's UAE to KPMG Canada, that does not make sense. It has to be part of the parent group or subsidiary or branch or an affiliate of that enterprise. That's important. Position can be in one of these three categories, either executive, senior managerial, or specialized knowledge capacity. So either of these three categories. So for example, if an individual is coming up with an accountant from KPMG Canada, KPMG UAE to KPMG Canada, it's going to be very difficult to justify until there is a specialized knowledge piece is there with that individual that will be implemented to KPMG Canada that was not there before. It is possible that that accountant from KPMG UAE can be transferred to under intra-company transferee to KPMG Canada. However, you need to define and explain that why do you need the expertise of this individual in KPMG Canada, so that it can enhance the management effectiveness or specialized knowledge in that sector of that company. For startups, the company may use its council address now. So for the startup visas, as I mentioned to you, that there is a little bit of correlation between startup visas and intra-company transferees. So startup visas may not have their established offices, and they still want to bring some individual on an executive level or senior management level or a specialized knowledge basis to the Canadian startup businesses. But they do not have the physical building in the beginning. For that purpose, the startup business may use the council's address until the purchase of the premises, and this is an example for that will be important for in those cases where, let's say, 5 individuals have put the application of startup visas that has already been approved, but the individuals have not traveled yet to Canada and have not been able to establish their physical office yet, but they also want an individual, they want to hire an individual from outside Canada under the intra-company transfer, because they were also managing some businesses in their country of residency as well. So in that capacity, of course, although the physical building is not there, however, their council's address, their representative address, may be used in lieu of their physical business addresses. The company must furnish realistic plans to start the new operations. It is very important. It cannot, all of these programs that what we are talking about, business investors, owner operator, LMIA, startups, and now intra-company transfer, all of these require a lot of homework, a lot of documentary evidence that you can genuinely provide the information to the reviewing officer that this was the idea, this was the experience, this is what the investment you're making, this is what your research says, and this is how you're going to succeed in Canada. So all of those things required as part of the application. The company must have the financial ability to commence the business in Canada and compensate employees. When transferring executives or managers, the company must demonstrate that it will be large enough to support the executive or management functions. So all of these things are mandatory and are required part of the intra-company transfer applications. Now, to conclude the overall business investors program and how individuals with different background and different skills they can come across to Canada using the previous programs that we talked about: business investors, startup visas, owner operator, LMIA, and intra-company transfers. We call it our ICT. There are other programs, the professional skill immigration programs, that one can consider if you do not fall in any of those categories, right? And again, these programs would be considered as one of the typical programs, but you may not have looked into it with much greater attention. And I think so it is important for me to share these programs. For example, OINP, extra-centric human capital stream, which is different than OINP in-demand skills. So registered nurses can also look into these programs as well. Of course, each program has their own specific requirements. I repeat again, each of these programs and the previous programs and whatever the programs that you choose, there are specific individual eligibility criteria which may vary and most likely vary from each of the other programs, even within the same province, which will be different, but they are the program requirements in order to meet and to apply under that program. So it's important to understand that distinction and look into the available opportunities for the professional skilled immigration programs. The other one I could think of is Saskatchewan International Skilled Worker Program, BCPNP Skills Immigration Program. So these are in a nutshell, the skilled immigration programs are available for those individuals who neither fall under the category of business investors, owner-operator LMIA, startup visas, or intra-company transferees. These are the programs that one should consider and think about looking into it with much more greater length.
I would like to take this opportunity to say a big thank you to Minas for his time and knowledge, to all our listeners for attending and making this webinar a success, and the institutions for supporting us.